Hi, and welcome to VFX Tutors. I'm Josh, and in this tutorial we're going to be continuing with hard surface modelling. We're going to be continuing with our chainsword model. So in the first tutorial we went through and just did the blocking and sort of got the rough idea of what we're going to model. So we can sort of focus on the things that we know we're going to need. It might change throughout for our build, but generally this is what it's going to be throughout. So what we're going to do first, the way I like to model things, I always like to start working my way through the bigger parts first, then we can work on the small parts. So our biggest bit here is clearly the big chainsaw bar. So this is what we're going to model first. And I've updated the reference, or this image was still in the first one, but there's some other reference as well. And we're going to model this, and you can sort of see here it's actually two pieces. So it's got this main bar bit, it's actually got this nose sprocket, and they're riveted on, and you won't be able to see it, but there's actually a tiny little sprocket in there as well, which, if I open that up, sort of looks like that. So you've got these rivets, and we can see a lot of the damage on here and what we're going to make. So it's not a super complex model, but there's some interesting shapes that we can start with our first sort of journey into hard surface modeling. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to hide my prop sword. There's an image plane there of this, so I'm actually going to delete this, and we'll start from, just going to dock this here, so I don't know why it's out there. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to just go to my panels, orthographic, front, and now I'm in my front orthographic view. That means that we don't see any perspective now. And the key to realism is just always using reference for everything. So don't try and just like do it from memory or anything. Always try and get as much reference in as possible, because it's the small little details that will make your model look realistic. So I'm going to import an image plane in first. So I'm just going to go view. So I'm in my orthographic view, so you can see the front minus Z here. And then go view, image plane, and import image. And I'm just going to navigate to my folder where I have my reference. So what one is that? That is this one here. You can select through and sort of see all the reference I've got. So we're going to use this one because this is a high res one. It's going to open, and we can sort of see our shape here. If I just turn my grid off, and you can see on our previous one where we just quickly blocked it out, we didn't have any of this. We kind of just chopped it off here because that's all we did for the quick concept. But now we can see it. You can sort of see. Let's go to our render. Let's see if we can improve this image by going to our renderer, viewport. It's already on quite high, so that's on maximum. So yours might be on low, but I just stick mine maximum size to see the full resolution, but it's just not a very good image, I think. So the thing is, what we got to do with this is probably built very symmetrical, but we can see here that this image is not taken directly down. So if I actually go to my poly modeling up at the top, if I just create a cube, first of all I'm actually going to select my image plane. I'm going to go to my channel box and lock all my translates and rotations. And I'm going to select them all, right click and lock selected. So now I can't move it or anything like that. So if I go to my go to shade and wireframe, or even actually I can use my X-ray mode so I can see a little bit more of it. And we've got this cube, and we want to sort of make this sort of match. So we can either right click and select vertex or face or edge. So most of our modeling we'll be using in this menu, holding right click and choosing your edges. If you press W, you can sort of move it around. Then same with your vertices, you can select them and move them around. And same with your faces. You can see it's sort of pulling one side because we're working on orthographic. So first of all, what I'm going to do is, we can also, if you go to our modeling toolkit here, and if you haven't done a lot of modeling in Maya, pretty much everything you'll need here to get started already. Most time it'll just be extruding, beveling, and cutting and welding. But also up here you've got your object selection and your vertices selection. And actually I find when you're working on big scenes, like we're not going to have a problem with this because it's not a huge scene, this is actually a faster selection sometimes. And I actually prefer to use this than going right click. But it's everyone has their own sort of preference. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to select this. I'm going to put it all the way to the end. And we can still see here straight away that we've got some sort of, because this cube is straight basically, we've not rotated it, we've just pulled it on its axis. So I'm going to select my image plane. I'm going to unlock my rotations. Press E. And I'm just going to rotate this so this is square. Just so it helps with the modeling, because the straight E things, you have everything, it makes everything easier because then you can just create things from the origin. You don't have to orientate them round. Everything that we say, if we click in a cube now, it's going to be perfectly square to it. But we already have a cube, so now let's. It's not going to be absolutely perfect, but we can get it better than it was before. I think that's pretty good. We can even go up here if we really want to fine tune it. We can go up here and 0.6. Where's my number? Where's that? My number pad's being a bit funny. No, we'll just do it manually, it's fine. Cool, so I think it's good enough. So now we'll just go and lock it. And now we've sort of sorted out our image plane and locked it so we can't rotate it. So looking at this model, well, this reference, sorry, we can see we've got this section here. Looking at it straight, we've got two round holes and this elongated hole. So this is something that we will model in. And you can see that this is actually two separate pieces here. So this section of it will model up to here and around here and there. Then we'll model this separate nose sprocket separately. Then we can add a sprocket inside. The sprocket inside doesn't have to be super detailed because we just won't see most of it. But having the sprocket will help with our rigging later on when we eventually finish it and do the chain and we have to animate the chain. So which side should we start on? They're both got their, that's not the hardest thing to start, but it's both got their small complexities with the holes and these bit here. So let's actually start on this end. So I'm going to go through this as if you've never done any hard surface modeling before. So this could be quite slow if you've done hard surface modeling before, or you can go ahead. So I'm just going to hide that cube because I just use it to line up. So we've got this hole here and this hole here, and what seems to be possibly another hole or a rivet here. It's hard to tell what that is. We can look at some other reference and see if there is another hole there. I think that's a rivet, but these are 2 holes, and that's possibly a grease hole. But let's just do these holes first. So, sorry, I was going on. So the way I like to do holes is I'll always start with a cylinder, and if I rotate the cylinder 90 degrees and go to our attribute editor, we can see this radius is 1 centimeter. So another problem is that our image plane is way too small, and what we can do, we can just roughly scale this up. We can scale it much more accurately a bit later, but we want to make it, when we're modeling stuff, we want it at a reasonable scale, because at the moment we'd be working at such a small scale. It can be a bit annoying sometimes. So we're going to treat this that's like a 1 centimeter gap for now, because once we've modeled it, we'll I think this is like a 37-inch bar, so we'll scale it up to something like that. But I might even say it, probably can't read that, but anyway, we'll just scale it up and lock it. It just makes it easier to work with now. So we've got our cylinder. What we're going to do, I'm just going to place that in the center of that hole. We go to my attribute editor, and if you can sort of see, we don't want that amount. Like, I know that's nice and smooth, but then we have to be accountable for every edge that we create. So when this gets smoothed, I know this will be round, but I also want to make sure that I'm working with a even sort of number, because then it can be symmetrical, and this will help us massively. So because we're working on a model that's for visual effects and not games, we don't have to worry so much about poly count. We can go over the top if we want. We can model all these extra little bits, but you still got to be quite careful. So all I'm going to do is just going to scale this roughly to that hole and get that in. And now we've got this sort of rough position of this hole here. And when I say you've got to be accountable for your edges, you can see that we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 edges that we have to find a place for as we come further out. So yeah, for now that's fine for a placeholder. So I'm just going to Control D and duplicate. I'm going to pull this down, and I'm going to use the same cylinder. I'm going to scale it up. And I'm going to match this sort of curve here. And you can see now the reason why it's an even number, because we don't have to model both sides. All we have to do is model one side, then we can duplicate or mirror the other side. So we only have to do one side of this to save time, and it's just more efficient that way. So because we're keeping in mind that our geometry's got even sides, when we duplicate it, they're going to match up. So it's very important to sort of know, because I've been there before where you've kind of just made things and you've not really thought about it. then when you have to start stitching things together or sewing points together, and you realize you've got like an odd number and they're not matching up, it can be a bit of a pain. So now I'm just going to Control D and duplicate this again, and now we have this edge. And you might be thinking, why I'm making cylinders, but I want the outside of this, right? But don't worry about that at the moment. We're just making sure that we've got these correct curves, and I'm not going to worry about that because that will be brought up in the duplication. So we've made these cylinders and we've sort of blocked out these holes. What we want to do is sort of create this edge here, because it's probably going to be quite straight. So what I like to do is, if I select both of my cylinders, then I go to Edit, I go to Mesh, and I can go to Combine. So now what this has done is combine the two meshes, and you can see here we've got these old transforms. So if we select our cylinder and delete our history, that will remove the old transforms. But we don't actually want cylinders. The reason why I'm using this is so I already have these perfectly round edges. So I'm going to go to my modeling toolkit, select my faces. I'm going to select all these lower faces, and I'm going to delete. I'm going to select all these faces and delete, and select these faces and delete, and also all these inside ones. So now I have this two curves. And you're like, why have you deleted all that? It's because I've now got a perfectly like mathematical curve. So when I duplicate this, it's going to duplicate around here, and it's going to look perfect. So now if I go to my panels perspective, I can see our cylinders now. I'm still in my shading X-ray. So what I can do, I can select all this. I can just pull it out, and I'm not bothered that it's at the moment that it's clearly too wide. It's not my priority right now. We can change that, and sometimes it's a bit easier to work like this because you can just see it. So I'm just going to select this cylinder. And it's the one that we merged. And if I go to my edges, I'm going to select this edge and that edge, and I can select this tool called Bridge, and it will do exactly what it says. It's bridged that edge, and we can add divisions if we want. We probably will need to add some divisions, because don't forget, when we make this hole, we're going to use this cylinder, and we're going to use it the exact same way as we've done here. So if we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 edges here, the chances are we're definitely going to need at least 3 divisions. We don't need 6 because we can add more. I'm just going to leave 3 because we're going to add some edge loops as well. Cool. So I'm just going to go back to my orthographic, go to my front. And now what I'm going to do is select this cylinder here. And I'm just going to select all my faces. So I'll hold right click and select face, or you can go here. I'm just going to select all these center ones, and I'm going to press delete. So now we've just got this edge. So if you go back to perspective, we can now see we've got these 2 hollow objects. And what I will do, I will actually just change the thickness to this. So I select my vertices. I'm just going to change my thickness to the same as this. So I'm going to select all my vertices, press W. and make sure that you're in, if you reset your tool, because we're working at the origin and everything's center and squared, we can work on our world space orientation, which is the best way to model in, because it just means everything's so much easier. When you start going into sort of component objects, it can be a little bit more tricky, because you just have to keep an eye on where you're putting things. But as everything's already at the origin and straight and square, we can work in world. So I've selected all my vertices, and if I hold V and just select this arrow, you see that it's blue, and now when it's over it's like sort of orangey yellow. If I select it, that means we can snap it only in that axis. So I just want to snap it to this one of these vertices here. Then I'm going to do the same to the other side. Hold V, select this arrow, and I'm going to hover over here. So now if I just move this up, I can see that's the exact same width. I'll just press Ctrl Z and undo that. Cool. So we've got these sort of basic shapes. I'm going to go to my orthographic front again, and I'm just going to select my edges. Sometimes it can be quite difficult to see, so I can tear off a small, so if you want to work in two windows you can, so you can tear off a copy. I prefer to tear off a copy because I like to pull it to my other screen, but the problem is you won't see that. So if I select my perspective and drag it in here, I can now see my perspective here, and hopefully that should help you guys to see what I'm looking at. So I can either select all these edges manually, or I could double click, and you can see here that it's selected the entire edge loop. And to help center on things, I can press F, and now that's centered my perspective camera around it. So I actually don't want to extrude all of this out. What I want to do is probably just do this side, because there is some thickness to this, but I'm not going to model the thickness. I can actually just model it as a plane, then extrude the whole thing together. The reason why I've done this is because it's just easier to work from pre-made models. So I'm going to press either Control E to extrude, or you can just select extrude here. It does the same thing. And you can either select thickness, and you can see what it's doing here. It's sort of pushing it out, or you do a local translate, offset. You can see what the offset does into perspective. Obviously we don't want to offset it, so put that to 0. And I got a feeling that these might be little indents. Let me just have a little look around. So let's actually undo that, because I know it's a really awful picture, but I think they're just stickers or painted sections. They look like indents, but cool. So let's not worry too much about that. So if we just press extrude, you can pull out on this arrow, and I'm not going to pull too much. I want to actually keep, I don't want to do that much, because I need to think about where this hole's going to go. So I need to give it space to figure out the sort of geometry. And you can sort of see it's come out black because we're actually seeing the wrong side of the geometry we want. We actually want the opposite side. So if we select our geometry, so if you see black geometry when you're working, you need to go to your mesh display and reverse. Now this has flipped the normals. This means now we're working with the correct side faces. So we've done this sort of edge. And when we made this circle, we made it symmetrical. So we have so if we go to our vertices, we can see we've got a vertex here. So we ideally want to make this line up with this one here. So let's select this model and this vertices. If we hold V for snap, and if we just select this direction and hover over the vertices that we want, this is now going to be perfectly aligned. So now if I go to, because I don't want to do it all from here, I want to work, in fact we can actually just select both of these, select both our cylinders, and we can go to mesh and combine. So we don't need them to be separate now, because they're going to be joined together in a moment. And we can delete the history, so now it's just this. So now I'm going to do the exact same thing with the cylinder. So I can double click, so I can select my edges here, sorry. And I can just double click and it selects the entire edge loop. So if I select extrude, do the same thing. And we can see that this is also dark. So if we go back to our object mode, we can, because we've joined them, we can't just select, because we've done this one first and we did this, if we just reverse them, it's just going to flip them and it'll be going backwards and forwards. So if we select our faces, double click, so that's selected all of it, then we can just mesh display and reverse just that single piece. Cool, so we now got, when we look at this, we've made this edge line up here. So if we select our edges again, so I was using right click and select edge, or we can select edge here and double click, and you can press Ctrl E to extrude for a hotkey. And what I'm going to do is you need to decide how. I think that will probably be alright like that. So it doesn't matter that it's absolutely perfect on top. Now we need to join this. So we've extruded that edge out, and obviously we have no edge here. So the first thing that we want to do is go to our vertices, make sure we've got no vertices selected. And if we go to our target world, if I zoom in, you can see as I hover over it, it sort of highlights a vertex. And whatever you highlight on, and if you hold click, it makes a circle. That means that's going to be the vertex that's going to move to the one you aim over. So if I move to this one, this has now welded that to that. And you don't really want to do it the other way around. You can, but it just means that you've broken the flatness of this. And when you do it like this way, it's easier to sort of break it that way. So we've used target weld, and we've sort of just welded that together. So we want to do the same for this, but we don't actually have anything to weld it to. So if I select my multi-cut, and you can see just selecting it, it sort of does its sort of thing. Over here, it sort of automatically like sort of snaps to vertices. And this is okay if you want to do stuff manually. But for this case, we don't. And you can hold shift and it will cut at angles. So that's 0 degree, I think that's 15, 30. Yeah, So you can cut it at straight angles like that. So we could actually use that there. Like that. And get a rough angle. Or you could hold Control and it will automatically make an edge loop, but it won't follow the topology. So I'm actually going to hold Shift. So what I did was hold Shift, left click. I just kind of followed this sort of angle here. And now what I can do, I can go back to my target world. I can select this edge and weld that there. Select that edge and weld that there. And now we've got this sort of hole welded. And we don't want to do that. We don't want to do that again because there's no point. We're just adding, we don't need to add more geometry to these flat parts. So what we can do is if we make sure we haven't got target weld on. If I select these edges again, press Control E, I can now sort of extrude this out to roughly where this joins here. Obviously we've got some geometry that's overlapping it, which we will fix. So this is bad. Never leave anything like this in your model because like it's going to do strange stuff like this. And it's going to be open and not closed. But this, we will fix it with just selecting target weld. So clicked, and now that's welded to there. And we can do the same to the other side. And you can see we're getting actually a little bit closer to the edge here, but let's not worry too much about that right now. We do want to leave some space though, so I'm actually not going to do it as much. So I'm going to go back to my vertices, select my target weld. Well, see, that's why you got to make sure that you don't have anything selected already, because you'll start welding stuff. And what you can do, you can sort of, because you've got sort of sharp angle there, it probably won't matter so much, but if you're doing this for like your show reels and stuff and you want to show out off your topology, you need to make sure that your topology is really nice and clean. So we've done that section. So we've got this other section here where it's kind of gonna be curving. And what I want to do is, because we've extruded this out and it's kind of come off at an angle, if we symmetrize this now, it's going to leave a gap here. So what I can do, if I select those two, hold R, and I can scale them, and then hold V and snap them to that point there. And now this means if I symmetrize this, that means it's going to match up nicely. I'll do the same for the other side. Select those two, hold R, and scale it. Press W, hold V, and snap. So now if I duplicated this and symmetrized it, it would match perfectly. So what I can also do, I'm going to sort of give myself a nice equal amount of space here, because we've still got to build this curve here. So I'm going to select this curve, I'm going to press Control E and extrude that out. Just going to straighten it off with my scale. So it's quite difficult to really see because it's so blurry, but we can see that there's a curve there. So we can sort of push it out with our vertices. So I'm just going to select this edge, Control E, pull it out, slightly start curving it up. And press Control E again. You can see we're now coming to this sort of curve section. We need to make sure when we're doing curves, we're matching the sort of rotation of it. Ooh. So you don't want to be going like that's a common thing you see that people that when you first start out modeling. As we go around a curve, ooh, you want to also rotate so the edge flows matches nicely. And you want to try and keep it roughly evenly spaced, because we've still got all this sort of stuff to do as well. So I'm just going to select this edge again, press Control E, and rotate that round. So you can see we're starting to create some sort of strange stuff here. So if I actually Control E and grow this up, select my vertices, and I'll go to my target world. I'll just target weld both these ends. And what I like to do is make this sort of really nice flow. And we could get to a point where, because we also need to make sure that we keep an eye on how many polys we're using, just for keeping this match. Because we've got 3 polys here, we've got 3 polys here, and we've not even got to that point there. So if I brought this up now to match that, so now we've got this sort of curve here, and what we've got enough space to finish off our sort of section. So we can go to our edges, and I'm going to select one edge and the other. Then I can use my bridge tool, and I can do the same again for that. Select these 2 edges, and I'm going to press G, and G is repeat command. And you can see that we sort of finished this curve bit, but it's looking quite messy. So I like to try and do things as I go along. I don't want to like make a complete mess model and then have to sort of go through at the end and make it nice and tidy. I like to do it as I go along, because then it just makes everything a lot easier for you. And I'm just going to go around and evenly space these vertices and just make it look nice. Because if you're wanting to sort of show this to a recruiter, the chances are you probably won't be. It'll be like a head of department looking at your show reel, and they'll be looking out for stuff like this. And even when you do your match move reels and stuff, like it's so competitive now in all departments that you kind of like, when you're doing a match move reel, you kind of want to submit a generalist sort of reel to show that you can just do more than match move. but it's not required. It's just, it'll give you a massive advantage. So sort of even this all out. Go to these edges here, we press Control E to extrude. Go to vertices. Make sure you haven't got anything selected. This looks like this is obviously, once you have some more practice doing this, you're going to be able to do this much quicker. Like something like this, you'd probably get, you wouldn't get a huge amount of time to model something like this in the workplace. Just Control E on that edge. Looks like the edges. Oh, sorry, target world. And these are kind of a bit wobbly, so I can select all my vertices. I can scale them so they're straight. So we've got quite a large rectangle here. It's not a huge issue, I don't think. If we wanted to add some extra geometry in there, but we don't necessarily need to for now. Cool. So we're coming up to a bit where we also have to sort of create this, but at an angle. So if we Control E, start coming up with how to sort of make this work. So I think I actually needed to extrude one more on the edge. So let's actually undo that. So just Control E. Just going to push that out so that matches. Select this edge and bridge. This isn't where we kind of need to be quite careful that we're not creating problems with our sort of topology. That's E. Scale that so that's flat. Hold V. Snap back to that. What we can do, we can bring this up. So spread these vertices out, because the closer together, the more we will see bumps if they're not perfect. Sometimes the easiest way to see is if you smooth it. Cool. So if we now go to our edge, select these, press Control E. go all the way to the edge there. And we've definitely missed a vertex here. So we can just select a target weld. Target weld here as well. Then let's bring this up. Let's Control E again. Go to vertices, target weld. What we're going to do is kind of space these out nice and evenly. Because you want it to look nice on your show reel. I think there's definitely some sort of kink in here. And you can see from our perspective. Oh, let's press F to center on it. It's not a very big window, and you can see we're starting to build it. Although we still need to sort these edges out, but that's something that we always do last. So I'm going to select this edge. And so just remember, at this end, we've still got to account for this as well. So we don't want to go, we want to make sure that we're still thinking about our topology and stuff. So before we actually start going crazy with adding more here, let's create another cylinder. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So in all our other cylinders, we're working on a 6-sided or a 12 subdivision axis one. And if I just rotate this 90 degrees, we can do the exact same thing up here. So we're just going to scale it up. We can change our shading to X-ray. And let's get approximately, we can try and hold snap in that axis and snap it to the center of here. Because even though we're sort of matching that up, if we slide that all the way down, we can see that our center axis is off. So, but let's hold V, snap it to there. Sorry, let's just do it here so we can see. So I'm holding V and in the Y, I'm going to snap it here. So now that's exactly in the center. And I know that's roughly, I've already matched that up and it's fairly correct, and we can sort of, there are ways that we can still model from this and get it in the correct position, because don't forget, we can see that this is taken at an angle. It's not dead on top. It's fairly close, but it's not straight down. Cool. So I'm actually going to duplicate that as a spare. I do that a lot. I always keep spares for my geometry. I don't ask why. But I'm going to select all my faces. And I'm going to delete them. And I'm going to delete those halves. So if I press F on that now, press F, sorry. I go to my, I'm actually going to quickly so this is what I keep as spare. So I'm going to push that up there. I'm just going to press 3 to check that the curve is sort of good, and it is. Just going to select my edge. Just Control E. And we obviously don't want to, you don't really want to do that, because when we come to smoothing it, it's not going to be the best. But we'll come to that. So what I expect we'll do is the most of the geometry will come down to this part. Let's actually just make sure we're selecting those. So Control E. So now I'm going to end up with 4 here. Sorry. This one, even though I've done this like a million times, you still make mistakes. So I'm not going to bring that one all the way down. So I'm going to Control E again. Now I'm going to use it, I'm going to drag this all the way down. And this is going to give me good reference of what I can continue to model here. And if I just hold V to axis and snap it down to there, I can now see what I need to do. So I'm going to pull this back. And I'm actually gonna select this, because if I look at my perspective, it's the normals are around the wrong way. So if I go to my display, select reverse. Now my normals are the correct way. And then also I'm just gonna select my faces. I'll select my vertices actually, so it's probably easier. Select these. It's a little bit difficult in a tiny window, but it just means you guys can see it as well. I'm going to press W for my transform, and I'm going to do the same thing as what I did with the other cylinders. So I'm going to hold V, and I'm going to snap it so it's flat with that. So now if I pulled these, they'll be directly on top. Cool. So now I'm going to select both my meshes. I actually don't need this bottom half, because we will mirror it. So I can delete that. And I can select both my pieces of geometry, go mesh, combine. And now this has combined the two meshes, and it's left my transforms. So if I delete my history, so I can select this button here, or I can go edit, delete by type history, and that's removed all the history from it. So now if I select my edges, if I select this edge and that edge, I can select bridge. I can select this edge and that edge, and I can press G or bridge again. And you can see that we're sort of making this edge loop now. And I select this edge and that edge, and press G for repeat. And you can see that now we've made this sort of edge loop going round. So, as always, I'd like to tidy up everything as I go along, because this is going to go round. And I want this sort of to be a nice curve going round. So this means that this needs to go further round. And what we're aiming for is a really nice looking curve. And we can sort of do that to the other bits as well. Like I say, you want to make this look really nice because at the end it's going to be your reel. Or it's not just to do that as well. It just means that when you do smooth it, it's not going to get any weird stuff going on with it. You're not going to get any kinks. Like if you're modeling, especially if you're modeling cars and stuff, and you're all modeling something that's got really shiny surfaces, you're going to notice those wobbles and bends. So I'm just using my target weld. Sort of weld that. I'm just adjusting all of this for a nice sort of topology. So we can see now we've got this huge space of stuff that's not been made. So I just want to, before I go any further, I just want to make sure what I've done is nice. So I can probably move that along here, just so we've got some more even spacings. It's not so bothered about the straight edges, but when you're working with curve edges, see the closer your vertices are, the tight you're going to get like pinch points, which is how you make sharp edges. So we don't really want sharp edges on a nice curved bit. So if we can spread them out as much as we can, that's for the best. So I'm actually going to select this edge and Control E to extrude. And I'm just going to pull this all the way to the end, because I know that this is going to go there, but we're not going to attach it to here. Well, we're going to attach this vertex to that. Oh, make sure we have only one vertex selected. Cool. So we know we've got this huge space of like 3 large rectangles. So we don't want to sort of go like, I can see why you'd think go that one, adjust that, adjust that. Oh, why is it not doing it? Adjust that, adjust that. You can do it that way, but then you could end up with like lots of kinks. The best way to do this is start off in the middle. In fact, actually start at one end. So now we've got one end matching there, one end matching there. We want to go to the middle. I'm actually going to select all these, go to my vertices, select all my vertices, hold R, and I'm going to straighten all these out, because it's going to be curved, because it's going to pick up on these bits, and it's going to sort of match the edge flow. But I don't particularly want to keep that. I want to make sure it's nice and straight. Then I'm just going to select this top one and bring that up. Then I'm going to do the same again to the top highest peaking part. So it's that bit there. And I'm going to do the same again, select all the vertices, scale it in one axis. Just going to select this top one, bring that up. You can still see that we're kind of sort of wobbliness. And if we do that again, just means we're keeping everything really nice and tidy. Only a really small amount there. I'm just adding edge loops with my multi-cut, scaling it so it's flat. Let me select the top bit. So I kind of like to keep an even amount of geometry. I don't like having big, long, rectangular shapes, although it probably doesn't matter so much. It's more of a preference thing. So if we can keep these equally, or as equally as you can, spaced out, it's ideal. So now we're getting pretty close to almost doing this one section. And now we just got to figure out what we're going to do for this sort of edge here. So we want to go around. So we've got this complete sharp right angle and it goes in here. So I'm going to select my edge, just this one. Just Control E. I'm going to rotate this around. Control E up again. The problems we can have with this is because we've got a point, and when we want to smooth this, this could give us some issues. So I'm just going to pull this out so it's even. Pull that up there. So if I select here, if I go to my perspective and look, see I've only extruded out this top bit, so I'm just going to try and get this to work properly first. I'm going to bevel this, so now it's added an even sort of section. And I'm going to do a really small bevel. So now it's not going to a point, it's actually going to another piece of geometry. And we can add another segment in there. Oh, no. Press 3. And we can see we're getting this sharp edge here. But now we've got a lot more geometry. So if we spread this out, because we could just bevel that, but then we'd have to follow this sort of, we could end up making, so what it sort of happens a lot when you see people modeling, they'll model it all, then they'll realize they need sharp edges, then they'll just go select all the edges and bevel, but then that's also got to follow, it'll bevel along the edge loops, so then it could make a big long straight line here and put a big crease in there, which we don't want creases. So what we can do, we can actually select this edge. Let's multi-cut here. So I've selected multi-cut, I've held Control, and I'm going to make an edge loop. So I've made this edge loop here, but I'm going to delete this. I'm going to bring this vertice up, and I'm going to select my edges, press Control E. I'm going to bring this up to the same amount, select my vertice, go to target world. Oh, make sure you haven't got any other ones selected. Sometimes it just remembers vertice selections. And now we've made this sort of edge loop here. So I'm just going to go around and tidy this up. So I am spreading it out a bit, just so it doesn't pinch in any way, but we'll see that when we put a shader on it and have a look at it smoothed. So now we've got this section here. We've sort of roughly done that edge. Now I need to figure out how we can do this other section. So we can do the same again. Like usually the other ways, you could quite easily just do it this way. Control E, the way I showed you before. Then when you're done with it, you can just bevel that edge. But don't forget, when you bevel it, you're going to end up beveling whatever loop that attaches to. So I just prefer it to do it this way, so it's nice and clean. Just do that. Bevel. What was it? 0.05. And what we can do here is pull this. So it's always good just to press 3 and see what you're creating. Don't worry about that, it's just where we haven't attached it. Or we have. What's going on here? Okay, so always be careful that you don't. I think that's probably because I extruded something and forgot about it. So we can sort of see that we've got some nice sharp edges here. And we'll check that it's not pinching when we put a shaded material on it. So we can actually because now we have this edge here and we need to match it. So I'm actually going to select multi-cut. You see that's made a cut all the way around the edge. It just shows that we've got a really good edge loop. Just gonna bridge. Just G. G. Now we'll probably come to the problem where we have we need to sort of do this here as well. So we actually need to let's match that. Well, if we select these edges, we can bridge. So let's actually bring this around, sort of tidy up this edge loop. So now we've got more, so we've added more down here, which we probably don't want. So it's always a bit of a puzzle sometimes, because I've not practiced this. This is me straight away doing it, so I'm gonna have some awkward pauses where I think for a bit, because now we've ended up with this, and this is where some people will get to and they'll be like, meh, I can just do whatever with it. So we need to figure out what we can do with this. So what I can do, I can just hold control, just make another edge loop. And now we've finished this off, and I've just select my edges. And I can go bridge. And now let's close that off. So what I'll do is just, let's see if we can tidy this all up. Just pull this up. Could do this, it's not quite straight, we can scale it. Cool. So now if we go to our perspective, turn off our X-ray, we can hide our, let's just press 3 smoothing and see what it looks like. We can turn our wireframe shading off. That's looking quite good on the corners. Don't worry about this, we're not worrying about that too much yet. In fact, we can actually just delete those faces, we don't need them. So if we press 3, we can now see we've got these really nice tight corners. If we go down here, we can see we've got the hole. This curve's all nice. We might need to take a look at this section here. Let's try and get this. It's very hard to see. What we can do actually, if we can go to our curves, select our CV curve. I'm just going to use this as a reference. Ooh. So I've just made a curve. And this can help us with sort of getting this smooth. So really tiny amounts. It needs to sort of come down. I'm just using the curve to figure that smoothing out for me. All these tiny little bumps that it's sort of picked up. I'll just delete that curve now. We can see we've got a really nice sort of smooth curve here, but we can see we've got some wobbly bits here that we can sort of straighten out. Cool. So we've got this end here. Try and make sure that these are a nice edge loop. we've got a pole here, so let's add an extra edge loop there, so when it does smooth, it doesn't pull out as much. So we can go now to our perspective. And what we can do now, we can mirror it, or once you're done with stuff, I am going to just change my pivot point actually. I'm gonna hold V, make sure it's at the bottom where we want to mirror it. And you can use the mesh mirroring tools and watch it mirrored as you're going along, or you can just Control D and -1 in the Y, and that's just duplicated it. That's not mirrored it, but now we've got the exact same thing mirrored. And we can go to mesh, combine. But if we smooth, we can't really see right now, but just because we've combined something doesn't mean they're actually joined. See, we've got a gap there. So what we can do is select all these middle vertices. You can select all the vertices, but it's safer to just select the ones that you want to weld together. Because we've got some quite close ones here. If we go to mesh, edit mesh and merge, this will now merge our poly vertices, and you see we've got a threshold. You can see if we even because we've got some really close vertices here, even if we bring it up to 0.2 or 1.1, it's going to merge, but because I know these are on top of each other, 0.1 should be enough. So if I select one vertex, it's now, all the middle ones are now joined. So if I press 3 now, I can see that we've got quite a nice looking first part of our chainsaw part. So if I go to my panels, orthographic top, I can go to this section where we've got these insert bits where we use the curves to create our holes. I can now delete those. So now we just have a plane. If I go to my perspective, so if I select all of my polygons and press Control E, I can now change my thickness. So this would be a centimeter, so let's do, I would expect that's probably alright, 0.3. Would be a good guess for now, although we can check that. Cool. So now we've got this sort of bar, but if we press 3 now, it's going to give us very undesired effect on our edges because we want obviously to be sharp. But what I'm going to do first, I'm going to hide my plane. I'm going to unhide my prop sword. I'm just going to look at the size. So this is I feel like I may have scaled this up a bit too big. So let's create a cube. Just use that for measurement. So that's 1 meter. So let me just find what our actual measurements of our sword was. So the sword handle was actually 27 centimeters. Just double check. That's always good to double check. Nothing's gone. Although we scaled this all at the beginning, so it should all be correct. Yep. Cool. And we can see straight away that our bar's way too big. So let's unhide our image plane. Select our image plane and our bar. And I'm going to unlock all of this. I'm just going to scale this down. This one's a much larger chainsaw blade than I realized. It's way too long for what we need. So I want to keep everything else. This is why we sort of concept it as well, because if we didn't really kind of know this, we don't want to go too far in it, kind of, because it kind of would also break the sort of concept as well. So we might have to change this gearing. But I think we can easily shorten it. So we hide our image plane. Let's go to our orthographic front. Change our shading to X-ray so we can see through. Cool. So we can see our chainsaw blade, and we can sort of see actually how kind of long we want it. So we've actually, what we can do is straight away, let's select those edge loops. If we hold Control and press delete, that will now delete all the edges and the vertices. If you just press delete, you'll leave the vertices in there, which is really bad. You don't want that. So whenever you delete edges, make sure you hold Control and press delete. That means you delete the edges as well. So let's go to our vertices. And let's now pull this chainsaw back to here. Let's unhide our image plane. And let's move this tip back to somewhere. Like, it can be longer, I think. We don't want it too short. And I guess the longer it is, it'll look cool because it's going to be really close to the camera. So let's hide that image plane. So let's select that edge loop. Let's bring this down a bit more. So obviously we're going to end up changing the shape of this. All I'm doing is just selecting one bit and then just doing in-betweens. And just making sure something has gone funny here. Maybe it's just... Oh no, something has gone funny on the back side. So let's select that edge, and that edge, you could delete the edge loop, double click on that and delete that. Oh, what's going on? Something's joining it. Let's delete that inside bit. Sorry, it's just trying to get it perfect so we don't get a mess up. Delete that. And if I delete this backside and delete that, cool. So now we've just got the flat plane again. Let's go to our front side again. Let's fix this topology. So we want to make sure that it's all looking nice. And you can be fairly creative with this. You don't have to do it exactly how the chainsaw is, but obviously the closer to a real chainsaw, the more realistic it's going to be. So, like I say, always keeping to your reference is going to be extremely valuable. So let's just turn our wireframe shaded on. And you notice that we've got these edge loops here. This travels quite a lot of it. It's not a huge deal. I prefer to add extra edge loops to reduce movement like this. It's unavoidable sometimes, but it helps with sort of texture stretching sometimes, although we can set the smoothing to not do that. I'm just going to try and get these nicely evenly spaced. So we're going to have to sort of adjust these. Cool. So, pretty much done with that bit. So, what we can do is just select all the faces, and we can extrude it again. What did we do last? 0.3. Maybe in 0.2. Cool. So now what we want to do is sharpen these edges. So let's start with the middle bit, and I'm going to double click on these edges. I'm going to select bevel. This bevels the edges. This allows us to make sharp edges. So I want to make a very sharp edge here. So now if I press 3 now, you can see the difference between this edge and these edges that haven't been done yet. So I'm just going to do the same for the others. Just going to hold Control Shift, double click, bevel. Two segments. Press 3. Now I've got some really nice sharp edges here. So now finally we need to do it for the outer edge. So hopefully if we've made a nice edge loop, it should go all the way around, and it has. So now if we bevel this, we can now see these corners are working really nicely. Press 3. Let's press Control 1, sort of isolate that. It's quite hard to see, but when you're working with hard surface, you really want to look at it in a sort of a shiny material. So if we hold right click, add new material, we can just add a thong, sorry, and you can sort of now see the shimmer on this, and this will sort of show you any sort of kinks or any sort of weird stuff going on in your mesh, and usually if you don't have any, it's pretty good. Cool, so we're pretty much done with this part of the chainsaw bar, and in the next tutorial we'll be continuing on with it. So if you've enjoyed this tutorial, hit that like button and subscribe for more like this.